Hey everybody, is the mic on? Can you hear me? Am I amplified? Yes, I am. Wonderful. Okay, slides will be, slides over there. Great. Okay, so maybe a bit different than some of the things we've heard in the last moments. So we're here thinking about privacy and the presence or absence of it in a practical sense, but I wanted to also open it up to a bit more of a open circuits of inquiry. And so I gave a talk at the Sapphirepunk Congress in Thailand in early November, and that was titled Sapphirepunk. So this was a linguistic split exploring a break or a possible new way forwards for the concept of cypherpunk. And today's talk further explores this idea of an epistemic break, but now it lays out, let's say, a underformed but more coherent alternative proposal, or at least a direction than I had 6 months ago. And first of all, because we're in a place, we're on some land, it's very fashionable these days to do a land acknowledgement. And so in Berlin, we are standing on the grounds of former Crusader territory. In the 13th century, Schöneberg and Kreuzberg were both Knights Templar lands. So I want us to honor and remember the Christo-fascists from 1,000 years ago that gave rise to the contemporary Federal Republic of Germany. And that's a joke that I'm making, possibly mixed taste, that's based on some land acknowledgements that are actually happening here in Germany in the middle of this insane genocide and the German response to that. So, okay, silence. Perhaps I didn't read the room. So, I want to recap what I spoke about in Bangkok on Sapphirepunk. And so, I couched the talk back then in a disclaimer, which I'm going to repeat to you again. This is a provocation, exploring an extremely specific purist opinion that I don't wholly share, but I think it's at least an interesting area to explore. Many might find these ideas objectionable, and that's kind of the point. I don't hold these opinions strongly, and I would not die on these hills. Lol. Okay, can I get a GM? I know it's not morning anymore, but GM. GM, good morning, GM, mornings are good. This is a reference to a greeting among Bitcoin and blockchain enthusiasts and followers of social media. The joke, such as it is, refers to the value of getting involved in a given crypto finance proposition early and the expectation of a bright future, and that's why we're all here, right? But maybe it was different in the past. Okay, so I want to give you a historical slip and a story of where the word cypherpunk came from. So, cypherpunk initially was a twist on cyberpunk. We all know this. Judah Milano is credited with that particular wordplay. And the idea of the cipher itself comes let's say, a few steps from the east. And so, we can trace cipher most clearly back to the Arabic word sifr, which is zero in the Arabic language. And indeed, the Arabs borrowed the concept of numericals which you can compute on from their misadventures and adventures in southern Asia, particularly what we call India today. And then this traveled eastwards. Indeed, Fibonacci sequence, golden ratio kind of fame, is credited with bringing cipher via Zephyrus into Latin and Western language. But I wanted us to think about the root of this word, that both zero and cipher come from this Arabic word for the void, for nothing, for concealment, for maybe even censorship. Okay, and here's a paper I dug out on the eve of the conference in Thailand in November around the censor's burden. This is kind of like some of the epistemic grapplings we have when we talk about information, particularly in a frame of information theory, and what the censor must know in order to be a just censor, shall we say. And this paper argues it's basically impossible because of the limits to knowledge, what can be known at a particular time. Okay, meme break. Here's a meme. Financial growth, exponential financial growth on a planet with finite resources. And hands up, who knows universal paperclips? I feel like there must be at least a few in the audience. Okay, just quick recap if you haven't played it yet. And in advance, I'm sorry if you waste an afternoon playing it. You probably should. You will learn a lot, or it will reiterate a lot about the way the world is today. So this is how I see our modern market-based, necrotic, capitalist present. And so Universal Paperclips is a simple web game where you control, you're a humble paperclip merchant. You click a button, you turn strips of metal into paperclips. Then after a while, you start getting tools, and you're there clicking away linearly. You start getting tools. This scales. This gives you scale. It gives you automation. And you end up, before too long, controlling a squadron of hyperdimensional intelligences, stripping the universe for all available material. And that's market-based capitalism. That's what we live in, but we have to live in that universe as well, right? I often route the conversations through some of Baudrillard's earlier work. Many of us are familiar with the idea of the simulacrum and the simulation, the idea that the abstracted kind of fake can outsurpass the real. But in his prior work, especially in the book Symbolic Exchange and Death, Baudrillard lays out a schema for mimetic economies, economies that play on cool codes of capital that don't have any real underlying them. And I'll give you a quote, because I think it's worth remembering. We now live in a world dominated by the free play of the monetary sign that is beyond reference to any reel of production or even a monetary referent in the form of a gold standard. In this world, the idea of real value, of equities, of commodities, of houses, of anything is meaningless, as what matters instead is not value per se, but infinite speculation. This new world is marked by the emergence of a brothel of capital, not for prostitution, but for substitution and commutation. Does that remind you of anything? And Baudrillard has this kind of three-stage genealogy, I guess almost kind of like in a Marxist frame, where we start from raw commodities, lumps of coal, sacks of wheat, whatever. We refine those using social value into steel or bread or whatever. But really the final form of value is this cold semiotic forms, symbolic codes. And I look around at, first it was coins, tokens, then meme coins, DeFi, DAOs, whatever. We even had things on the TradFi side like GameStop. We've now got crypto things which are starting to eat the stock market, like Strategy and all these companies building Bitcoin and Ethereum treasuries. So I think Baudrillard's work warrants a reappraisal in the present day. Okay, I'm not going to talk about Raymond and his cathedrals and bazaars or the price of anarchy today. It was me gatekeeping the Ethereum Infinite Garden in Bangkok. Found that across the road from the venue. And then okay, so last time what I said was, Ethereum can't be cypherpunk actually because of that terrible thing that you did at the start of it that we never talk about again. And that is the DAO exploit in 2016. I'm not going to litigate it in depth again here, but I will just show you some of the promises and warnings that came up at the time. Some of the criticisms that especially the Bitcoiners have made. The Bitcoiners don't take this Web3 movement seriously because they think you can just delete shit at will. And what's the fucking point, if you don't mind my French? There's been some movements and attempts, including this one, to rehabilitate the image of Ethereum in terms of cypherpunk, make Ethereum cypherpunk again. And I will just note that in this article, which Vitalik wrote and which somebody over there fact-checked, I can see according to the acknowledgements, there's an awful lot of valor being stolen from Bitcoin, if I'm being unkind. It almost seems like all of the virtuous examples of cypherpunk are being borrowed from Bitcoin, and we're kind of not talking too much about the other stuff like irregular state transitions and deleting attackers' balances and whatever. Can you guys stop trading? All of that stuff. Anyway, there's this thing called code is law. Maybe some of you will still remember this. I think it's in the graveyard now. We put it to death after the DAO hack. But there was a group of people in the 90s onwards, Bill Mitchell and Lawrence Lessig, most notably in those early days, hypothesizing that we could inscribe and embed our values into technologies, and they would kind of outlast those moments. In the 90s, that sounded very cute. The internet was barely a thing. But now we have persistent programmatic cryptographic substrates, like blockchains, where we can embed these values and they could potentially last for very long periods of time. I won't say forever because a lot of things got marketed as being forever and they already started to decommission them. So I don't know, for a while, let's say. Okay, and then the DAO hack happened and there was a chain split in Ethereum. Ethereum forked off, broke the rules, forked off. And there was a group of people in that community that said, no, we're not going to fork off. We believe in code is law. We believe in, if rules are broken, we're going to keep doing this. And that became the Ethereum Classic community. And they derived their identity from this concept of code is law. Here's one of the logos at the time, which was a phoenix arising from the flames of the whatever thing, the bad thing that happened, the catastrophe. And by the way, I was writing about forks. That was where I started doing my first field-specific research in 2017 and 18. And I ended up speaking at the Ethereum Classic Summit in Korea in 2018 because they read my work, and it was more charitable about them than most other people's at the time. But what was interesting was, at that point, I made a series of predictions about what was going to happen to their network the longer that Ethereum would delay the move to proof of work. And indeed, one by one, very sadly, they all came true, ending with an enormous 51% attack on the network. 6 weeks worth of transactions got reorged, as I remember, and the exchanges got cleaned out. And so paying attention and being inside this little movement, trying to understand it as a community or something like, you know, the principle, how can I say it, conscientious objectors to the situation in 2016 was very interesting, but there wasn't much of a community there, if I'm honest. All right, so I would say Code's law is a good example of what you might call algorithmic formalism. Like we set the rules, and then we can't change the thing in the future. And we see these kinds of ideas all over the place, and they're responsible for a lot of ills in the world, let's say. Just by the way, I don't know if I can go back. Yes, code is law. What about the law bit of code is law? Does the law change? Yes, the law changes because the world changes, technologies change, jurisdictions change, facts change, realities change. So what is the law part of code is law if we're not referring to the law? Natural laws, maybe? Well, you should read my epistemology work about how the natural laws aren't laws. Okay, and then one of the things I did very briefly in Bangkok is I talked about Sapphirepunk, which is Bitcoin, proof of work. Like we give the machine all the power and all the agency. So here's a little bit of poetry. The church and the network, zeal and time, death and money, all sides of the same coin. All right, so Bitcoin. It looks like it's pretty cypherpunk. It looks like it's pretty decentralized, looks like it's pretty permissionless. There's no gods, no masters to a first approximation, but this comes at possibly the ultimate cost. So we've built a system which has no sensory capabilities beyond its environs. All it knows is it needs energy, and every 2 weeks, the probability of a hash finding a block gets recomputed, this lottery ticket kind of mechanism, so that the block clock, the real innovation of Bitcoin, the decentralized temporal regime that is Bitcoin, can keep ticking regularly at the possible expense of boiling the oceans. And obviously, much ink and hot air has already been spilled on that. Okay, so he said this, it's indifferent to us, maybe even insufferable. Okay, well that's all well and good. People always say, yes, Wasim, thank you very much for all the criticism. Do you have any constructive ideas about how we might actually fix this garbage heap of a situation? Well, here's something called Sapphirepunk that I've been working on with a few other people, and I would say it's a work in progress, provisional, I'd say provisionally articulated proposal on a way beyond some of the dead ends of this kind of like techno-libertarian dream which became associated with the word cypherpunk. So first of all, I would just note that there was this very famous document which most of you are probably aware of from 1993, Eric Hughes' A Cypherpunk's Manifesto. All I really want to point out here, like, you know, we'll get to the rest of it in a minute. What I really want to point out here is, like, in the title, the way it's laid out, A Cypherpunk's Manifesto. It's A is an individual, cypherpunks is a possessive. So we've already, in the title, prefigured the worldview from which this is being espoused and through which you will receive it. Okay, Sapphirepunk is an on-chain technology, EN, on-chain. And here are the co-authors of this document. Some of them are anon, some of them aren't. Oh, and that QR code, you'll be able to read a preview of this document. It's about 3,500 words long. I'll also show it at the end, so don't worry if you don't catch it right now. Okay, and then I'm going to start reading you stuff. This is a conference where the person on stage gets to advertise to you, right? I don't have anything to sell, but I've got some concepts, so I'm going to ram them down your throat for the next 8 minutes. The world cannot be protected by cryptography alone. We are the Sapphirpunks. We inherit the tools of cryptographic resistance and invoke them not for escape, but for togetherness. Privacy is not a bunker, it's a commons. Sovereignty is never in isolation, it's always in relation. Sapphirepunk is a call for a reformation, not a rejection of the original cypherpunk ideals, but a reckoning for today's world. We summon forth a new poetic and political imaginaries that expand beyond the sovereign individual into the plural and the planetary. We demand the crafting of technologies that nurture meaning, resilience, and communal flourishing. We will not passively receive the futures we deserve. We must collectively bring them into being. We reimagine cryptographic tools as instruments of communion, not alienation. To act as a Sapphirepunk is to believe that privacy is a necessary starting condition for imagination, resistance, and community, not the endpoint. We envision technologies that uplift the collective, not merely cloak the self. We wish to create tools that serve not only the technologically fluent or the economically privileged, but also those most at risk from state violence, political oppression, corporate surveillance, and techno-fascism. Okay. You can read these offline another time. I will get to the good bits because we only have a few minutes left together. The collective promise of cryptography. Today, we are all cyborgs, not just interfacing with cryptographic systems, but co-poetically bringing their meanings and consequences into being. The tools we build reflect the worlds we wish to inhabit. The self, like a networked node, only experiences meaning through its edges. There is no cryptographic truth without a handshake. No key without an other to unlock. No privacy without shared trust. Worse still, the more secure the enclave, the lonelier the architect. The myth of the ungoverned self forgets that to exist at all is to be born into a web of care, memory, and responsibility. As Hannah Arendt reminds us, freedom is born not in isolation, but in the spaces in between. In the web of human relations where action, speech, and remembrance take shape, a politics of privacy. Oh, I can't read the rest. Okay, I'm going to skip that. This is important. Like, we can have our eyes glaze over as we sit in these post-launch talks, but I think this is the most important part of this document. I want to read it carefully with you. Feel free to front-run me and take a look at it while I take a sip of this Mate. Recuperating the humiliated technological subject. The emotional substrate of cypherpunk, despite its technological rationalism, is affectively shaped by shame, paranoia, and fear. Shame in particular plays a central yet disavowed role. The shame of being seen, the shame of being known, the shame of exposure. It is a fantasy of purity and control, a dream of a self-sovereign subject who never has to depend, reveal, or negotiate. Shame is fundamentally an individualizing and narcissistic emotion. It centers the self as a failed or contaminated object, and in doing so, isolates rather than connects. The cypherpunk reacts to vulnerability by retreating into technical mastery, encrypting everything, trusting no one. But this dream leaves little space for cooperation, solidarity, or repair. When privacy is grounded in shame, the ideal becomes to disappear, not to relate. Trust is seen as a bug, not a feature. Dependence is weakness. Vulnerability is flaw. What emerges is a social... Oh, I can't read that, whatever. Okay, there is no security through insecurity. That's the punchline. Okay. And I want to wrap this little kind of whistle-stop tour of this new document with the final thoughts in it. Endings and beginnings. The old cypherpunk dream is dead. Cryptographic armors wielded in isolation have now been co-opted as the weaponry of the very hegemony the cypherpunks sought to resist. Privacy auctioned, freedom commodified, solidarity fractured by market logics. This is the cost of mistaking encryption for emancipation. We refuse this hollow future, living in the ruins of techno-capital exploitation. Technology alone cannot heal broken trust, nourish our commons, nor honor the web of life. Now that the master's house is also a casino, exploiting both their tools and ours, we must regroup and build new architectures rooted not in fear, but in radical care and community. Okay, that's it. Thank you. If you want to download it, it's scan that code. Yes. Whoops.
More questions? We can have 1, 2 to Asim.
Go ahead. Come at me.
Paul, do you have one?
Where there wasn't really much Crusader material. I was kind of disappointed. How did the Crusades fit into this new Sapphirepunk?
Well, if you look at the Crusades from the Eastern perspective, Paul, which is something that I know you're not that keen on doing, you will notice that jewelry, as well as other kinds of material riches, is often given by the Eastern victims of the Crusades as the real motivation for the Westerners coming over to fuck their shit up. Not so much this like God, whatever, holy stuff, more the take our land and jewels stuff. So that's how it's Sapphirepunk.
More questions? I will give you one because when you were saying Sapphirepunk, I was thinking, oh, it's a plurality of punks here and there, like DefiPunk, CarePunk, Sapphirepunk. Are you accepting personally the notion that there will be plurality of different just playgrounds and people trying to go their own subcultural of punks that I usually refer that there's only K-punk and that's it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, these are memes. These are like little ideas that might, gestate and germinate into ideologies or movements. So they're going to bloom. Or at least they're going to be planted, and people will discuss them and see if they resonate with them and see if they germinate and turn into movements. Ultimately, I think like you can be your own punk. Yeah, there's no monopoly on the memes of ideation, let's say.
And also I saw that there's a poet on your cap, and I was thinking there's a poetry in there, and there's a Julio from Poetic Technologies. And there's what's the role of the poetry have you seen with this industry and the potential?
Well, I just for full disclosure, there is a subunit of the 0x Salon platform which I helped to run called the Cryptographic Poetics Researchers Union. So I would argue that the poet, especially in the business of cryptography, the poet is themselves encrypting and decrypting, or let's say transforming and mutating meanings. The poets have the sharpest knives, much like the satirists. So they can go to places with the creative license that others can't. And the other thing is that poets aren't working in Web3 and they aren't funded by Web3 treasuries, so they can say what the fuck they like. They're not going to get sacked by their Sapphirepunk bosses.